The late afternoon sun burned red over the Arizona plains, casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth. Dust swirled in the wind as a lone cowboy urged his weary horse forward. His hat was pulled low, and the brim shadowed a face etched with worry and determination. He had received word that a neighbor's newborn was in desperate need of milk, and the thought of the infant's cries haunted him. Every mile he rode brought him closer to a small hope, one that rested on a woman living quietly on the outskirts of the desert, an Apache woman known among the scattered settlers for her kindness and strength. The cowboy rode past scrubby mesquite trees and dry washes, the rhythmic thud of hooves against the earth keeping pace with his racing heartbeat. He glanced back toward the town he had left hours ago, wondering if he would arrive in time. The baby's cries seemed to echo on the wind, though he knew it was only in his mind. Each step of the horse brought him closer to the clearing where he hoped the woman might help. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold, he finally spotted a small camp near a narrow creek. Smoke rose lazily from a tiny fire, and a few chickens pecked near a wooden fence. The cowboy slowed his horse, eyes scanning for movement. Then he saw her, a woman kneeling beside the fire, carefully tending to something small wrapped in cloth. Her dark hair glinted in the sun, and her posture was both strong and graceful. She looked up as he approached, alert yet calm. He dismounted quickly, tying his horse to a nearby post. "Please," he began, his voice roughened by dust and worry, "it's a newborn, he's starving. We have no milk, no one to help." He didn't know how she would respond. Many settlers had their suspicions and mistrust of Apache people, but something in the woman's eyes told him she understood his desperation. She stood slowly, her movements measured but confident. Her gaze softened when she looked at the bundle he held, a small, wailing infant whose cries had grown weaker with every passing hour. Without a word, she gestured for him to hand the baby over. The cowboy hesitated, then gently placed the child into her arms. The moment the baby touched her, the cries began to fade. She murmured softly in a language the cowboy didn't understand, rocking the infant with a tenderness that made his chest ache. The sun dipped behind the mesas, and for the first time in hours, he felt a glimmer of hope. This woman wasn't just offering milk, she was offering life, care, and perhaps something even more profound, the presence of a mother the baby desperately needed. The cowboy watched silently as she held the child close, feeling the warmth of her body against the tiny one. He realized that this moment, this desert meeting between a desperate man, a newborn, and a compassionate woman, was something he would never forget. In the heart of the barren plains, life had found a fragile but powerful way to survive. The cowboy stood a few feet away, shifting from one dusty boot to the other, unsure if he should speak or stay silent. The Apache woman held the baby effortlessly, her dark eyes softening with every gentle sway. She whispered words the cowboy couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. The child was safe now, and his cries began to fade into soft whimpers. The cowboy felt an unfamiliar sense of relief mixed with awe. He had never seen someone move with such quiet authority, yet radiate such warmth and care. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rough from hours in the sun. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he could offer. She glanced at him, her expression calm yet unreadable, and inclined her head slightly. It was a gesture that spoke volumes. She recognized his gratitude, but she needed no praise. Her focus remained on the infant, whose tiny hands curled around her fingers as if instinctively knowing he was safe. Over the next few moments, the cowboy watched as she fed the baby. She had been prepared. A small clay pot sat nearby with milk she had stored for her own child long ago. The infant nursed with urgency, his small body relaxing against her chest. The cowboy marveled at the sight, realizing that survival in the desert often depended on people like her, people willing to extend kindness without hesitation or expectation. He could see the strength in her arms, the patience in her movements, and the quiet courage in her eyes. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. The cowboy leaned closer to listen, straining to catch her words. Though he couldn't understand her language, the tone carried meaning, reassurance, instruction, and care. She gestured for him to sit by the fire, patting the ground beside her. Hesitant but grateful, he obeyed, feeling the heat of the fire warm his tired bones. As the baby slept peacefully against her chest, she began to share stories, not with words he understood, but through gestures, expressions, and the occasional simple phrase in English she had learned from travelers. She spoke of her life on the plains, of her people, and of the wisdom passed down through generations. The cowboy listened intently, fascinated by her connection to the land and the quiet strength she exuded. He realized she had faced hardship, loss, and solitude, and yet, here she was, offering life to another without hesitation. Hours passed as the cowboy helped with simple chores, fetching water, gathering firewood, and keeping watch over the camp. He felt a growing respect for the woman, recognizing that her role was more than caretaker, it was sacred, rooted in empathy and courage. He watched as she rocked the baby, humming a soft, melodic tune that seemed to blend with the whispering wind across the mesas. In that quiet desert evening, under a sky streaked with the colors of dusk, the cowboy understood something profound. The woman had become more than a helper, she was stepping into a role far deeper than either of them had expected. She was becoming the mother the baby desperately needed, and in doing so, she was offering the cowboy a lesson in compassion, patience, and the unspoken bonds that could form between strangers brought together by fate. For the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt hope, not just for the baby, but for the fragile promise of a new beginning. The days following that first encounter passed in a quiet rhythm, punctuated by the soft cries and coos of the infant. The cowboy had stayed near the Apache woman's camp, initially out of duty, but gradually out of a growing sense of connection. He helped with chores, gathering firewood, drawing water from the creek, and keeping watch over the camp, but mostly, he observed. He watched the woman cradle the baby, her movements precise yet gentle, as if every action were part of an unspoken ritual of care. Each morning, the desert awoke with a golden light that seemed to bless the small clearing. The woman would hum quietly as she prepared food for them, her eyes occasionally glancing at the cowboy with a hint of amusement when he struggled with simple tasks. There was a silent understanding between them, a mutual respect forming as they worked alongside one another. The cowboy felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and a quiet fascination. As the baby grew stronger, their bond deepened. The infant's cries became fewer, replaced by tiny coos and gurgles, and the cowboy often found himself sitting nearby, watching in awe as the woman soothed him. She shared stories of her childhood on the plains, of her people and their traditions, sometimes pointing to the surrounding mesas or tracing shapes in the sand. Though much was lost in translation, the cowboy understood the essence of her words: resilience, love, and connection to the land. Evenings were the quietest. The sun would dip behind the rocky horizon, casting long shadows across the camp. The cowboy and the woman would sit by the fire, the baby nestled safely between them. Sometimes, she taught him small lessons: how to recognize edible plants, how to read the signs of approaching weather, and how to move with patience and observation rather than force. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that survival on the plains required more than strength. It required understanding, empathy, and harmony with the world around them. Over time, the cowboy began to see the woman not just as a helper, but as someone who carried the essence of motherhood in every gesture. The baby's eyes would light up when she approached, his tiny hands reaching for her as if instinctively knowing where he belonged. And the cowboy felt it too, a sense that the woman was filling a space in the child's life that no one else could. One evening, as the desert stars began to shimmer overhead, the cowboy spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You've saved him," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've saved more than just him." The woman smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. There was no need for words, the bond between them was clear. She had given the baby life, care, and comfort, and in doing so, had changed the cowboy as well. In that vast, lonely desert, they had found a fragile yet profound family, an unexpected connection born from urgency, kindness, and courage. And as the night embraced the camp, the cowboy understood that some of the strongest bonds were not formed by blood, but by love, trust, and the quiet courage to care for another in a world that often demanded survival above all else. The desert mornings had grown cooler as autumn approached, and the cowboy watched the small camp with a sense of contentment he had not known in years. The baby, once frail and desperate, now cooed and gurgled happily in the arms of the Apache woman. Each day, their routine became a rhythm of care and quiet companionship. The cowboy's tasks, fetching water, tending to the horse, and helping gather firewood, felt less like duty and more like part of a life he was beginning to cherish. The woman had become the heart of the camp. She moved with a natural grace, guiding the baby through the world with tenderness, teaching him the first lessons of life with patience that only a mother could possess. The cowboy noticed the small details: how the child's tiny fingers would reach for her, how his eyes followed her every movement, how he relaxed completely in her presence. In those moments, he understood that family was not defined solely by blood, it was defined by care, love, and devotion. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas, painting the sky with shades of amber and rose, the cowboy spoke softly. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done, for him, for me," he trailed off, unsure how to express the depth of his gratitude. The woman met his gaze with a quiet smile, her expression serene. No words were needed, the bond between them had grown too deep for simple phrases. The cowboy had realized something profound over the past days. He had come searching for milk, but what he had found was far greater. He had found a woman whose heart matched the vastness of the desert, strong, nurturing, and full of quiet courage. He had found a family in the most unlikely of places, a connection that would endure long after the dust settled and the days grew colder. Together, they watched the baby sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. The fire crackled beside them, and the wind whispered through the scrubby mesquite trees. The cowboy felt a sense of hope and purpose unlike anything he had known. He promised himself that he would protect this fragile but precious life, and honor the woman who had given the child not only nourishment but love and safety. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the three grew stronger. The cowboy stayed longer than he had planned, realizing that he no longer wanted to leave. The Apache woman welcomed him into her world, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments under the endless sky. And the baby thrived, growing stronger and happier each day, his eyes bright with the wonder of a life saved by compassion. In the heart of the desert, under a canopy of stars, a new family had quietly formed. The cowboy, the Apache woman, and the child he had come to save had discovered something rare and precious, love born not from obligation, but from courage, kindness, and the willingness to care for another. And as the wind carried the scent of sage and earth across the plains, it seemed to whisper a promise of hope, of life, and of beginnings that could blossom even in the harshest of landscapes. In that moment, the cowboy knew that his search had led him to far more than milk. It had led him to a family, a home, and a future filled with love, trust, and the quiet magic of human connection.